What's up, everybody? Mic check, mic check. How do we sound? How do we sound? What's up, everybody? What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? What's up? What's up? There we go. In the chat. What's up, everybody? What's up? The chat down there. Let's get that down there. Exit out on all this stuff. Let's keep that there, though. All right, let me pull up some stuff and we'll start yapping. What's up, everybody? What's up? What's up? This is perfect. This is perfect. All right. May I ask a question before you? Of course, of course. Don't be mad if I don't know the answer. I don't know everything. Here we go. Maybe that sounds better. Where was I going? I was gonna search Washington State, and then we're gonna go to California. What does black define a judge as? So, um, one thing you'll learn about law dictionaries, like um, Washington State, and there we go. And then we're gonna go to California, but we can just answer it. So, California, California, California. Ooh, California would be at the top. California. All right. So, let me see. I can pull it up. The one thing you have to know about law dictionary, I'm not trying to be an expert in any of this stuff. I'm just saying this is just my experience. Sometimes the word you think you're trying to know is not the word that you're trying to know. And I'll actually give you an example by the word judge, right? So we're gonna go to let's look up the word judge. So we'll go to J. Let me pull this up over here. So we'll go to I'll give you all the definitions of the word judge. You'll probably be disappointed because it's not gonna be what you think it is. Because we want the deeper meaning of the thing. They're not gonna give us the deeper meaning. You have to know the word that explains the deeper meaning, and they don't tell you that word. Judge. Here we go. Judgment. We'll go to That's a bunch of judgment. They got a lot of judgments. Because again, we say this all the time. They're not judges, judge. Okay, here we go. What's a judge? Um, dictionary. Boom. All right. So it's slow. It's got a lot of P. All right. Let's see. That's the letter N. So we need to go to the letter J. That's the letter I. That's the letter L. M. Somebody's not great at the alphabet here. Judge. Perfect. We went on it. All right. All right. So let's go to judge. All right. The first definition from the early 1800s is a public officer lawfully appointed to decide litigated questions according to law. Okay, that's not what it means. That's not what they do. They said this in its most extensive sense includes all officers who are appointed to decide such questions, and not only judges, properly so called, but also justices of the peace and jurors. That's our favorite part, who are judges of the facts and issue. And they say, see all these Supreme Court cases, right? So when you look up the word judge, they use the word to figure out what they're doing. That's not what they're doing. That's not what a that's not the guy we're dealing with. So they say, so in a more limited sense, the term judge signifies an officer who is so named in his commission who presides in some court, right? So that's one definition. And then let's go to this will be the late 1800s. They say a judge is a public officer appointed to preside and to administer the law in a court of justice, and a chief member of a court, and charged with the control of proceed. This is what they're supposed to be doing. That's not what they be doing every day, right? So they say the chief member of a court in charge with the control of proceedings and decisions of questions of law or discretion. Judge, justice are often used in the same sense, right? Go to one, oh, that's the letter C. Hij. Okay. Mm, here, jurary, jurary, judge, judge, judge. I have it. They got a million words with the word judge in it. All right, judge, an officer so named in his commission who presides in some court, a public officer, the chief member of a court, yada yada yada. And they give explanation in some of this one, but none of this is gonna tell you. So they'll tell you one thing: the judge and the court are often right. So sometimes they'll say the court has held, which will mean it has, right. Okay, none of that is what the guy we're dealing with is. Okay, um, who, I think North Carolina explains it the best. The North Carolina Code. You go to page one, section one of the North Carolina Code. They're going to tell you there's two types of actions within this corporation called the state of North Carolina. Right? They're going to say there's a criminal action and then there's a civil action. They say these are the two types of things that will be brought into the courts, hypothetically, right? Okay, well, we know that a crime 100% of the time at common law requires an injured party, right? So they have a little citation in the North Carolina Code. they'll say, uh, they use their corporate language, right? They'll say, "Okay, well, a crime action that affects persons and property." Okay, we'll work with that. The reason we work with that is because they have the North Carolina citation under that statement. So they got the North Carolina Constitution as the citation on where they define this first part of crime. Then you have the rest of the definition of a crime, and they'll say, "Okay, well, a crime is a violation of a criminal statute." Okay, so that means whatever they write, then that's what is considered a crime to them, right? And then they say, okay, 2 types of actions. There's a criminal action, and there's a civil action. They say every other action is a civil action, right? So they say every other action is a civil action. So, and then they don't have no constitutional citations. They don't say Article Section 1 of, I'm just making up stuff, of the North Carolina Constitution, right? So they'll just make up for the rest of the definition of the word crime, right? And then they say everything else throughout the entire book, North Carolina Code, or the books called Carolina Code, is a civil action. Okay, bet. Well, when we get to this guy called a judge, well, we know he's not a judge because I haven't read. I bet you the North Carolina Constitution would say something to the effect, and then the North Carolina Supreme Court would confirm that the jury would be the judges of the law and of the facts in all criminal cases. Okay, and then that would be attributed to the Constitution. Everything else would be under the control of this guy called a magistrate, who they call a judge. That's the actor part. We think he's a judge, right? And this is a great question because I actually this morning I was in a restaurant breakfast. I looked up every definition of the real word that they really are, and they are called traitors. Praetor. Praetor. Somebody say praetor. Praetor. I don't understand how a judge knows the law allowed him to proceed with charge because he gets paid not to obey the law. He gets every time it's not a real crime that a jury that's he gets paid uh to not do this stuff. Somebody else pays him, and it's not from the treasury, right? If it's a state, whatever the state is called. Yeah, he's not our friend. This is our this is the result of the Civil War. We haven't had I tell y'all this all the time, we haven't had state government since the Civil War. See, in the federal, they've always been magistrates. That's what they do. Almost hypothetically, no crimes in the federal. Everything to them is a civil action, even if they call it crime, right? Same way they do it with us now. I'm just saying, federally, see, this is why we federal jurisdiction, state jurisdiction, 2 completely different things. I'm actually gonna talk about those things tonight, but as far as this guy we called a judge, so we call him that. We shouldn't have been calling him that. Uh, he's a judge over civil issues, and every time you go in there and there's no injured party, even though they call it a crime, well, that's a civil issue. That's why he is in charge of that case, and he decided. This is the principle of equity that these people scammers on the internet, they want you to it's a scammer. I wish I could say I should have screenshotted his page. He's trying to comment on all my videos talking about, "Oh, well, equity will not allow a remedy to whatever to pass, a right to be wronged," or something like that. And you go to his page, he's like the most federal you've ever in your life. I'm like, "Get dude blocked immediately." Right? Because they want you to believe that, oh, you participate in equity, oh, you're the one that's in charge, and then you get in trouble and you end up in front of this guy in a black robe who don't care nothing about Jesus that you're right? So, this guy in a black robe is called a praetor. Somebody put in the comments. Praetor, praetor, a Roman praetor. I'm gonna read you all the definitions that I got of it. So, a praetor, praetor, Praetor. I probably spelled it wrong. I probably said it wrong. Praetor, yep, that's it. Praetor. Let me see what else I was gonna say. Yeah, these guys are Roman praetors, okay? Since the Civil War, we've not had any state government. This is special apple juice. Um, alright, so the oldest definition is they say this thing called a praetor, this is the early 1800s, so I like to define things before the Civil War and after the Civil War because that's when the country changed fundamentally, right? And so a praetor is the name of an officer, remember called the judge and officer, municipal officer, alright? So they said this guy called the praetor is the name of an officer appointed to administer justice in Rome. So when I tell you they get paid from somewhere else, they get from somewhere else. They said this name is also given to an officer authorized to govern in certain provinces. Alright, that's one definition. And then, excuse me, this is another definition of praetor. They say this word praetor in Latin in the Roman law is a officer of the city of Rome. He is the chief judicial magistrate and possesses an extensive equitable jurisdiction. There you go. That's the guy you're dealing with every day. Put on his nice black robe, and they said, they got a little Latin here. I'm not gonna try to pronounce it. They said a special praetor was created to pronounce judgments, cases of trust, or whatever the little Latin phrase is. So what happened? Well, let me read the rest of these definitions that I got. So they got another one. It's the Latin phrase I can't pronounce. They said this guy, special praetor, uh, created to pronounce judgment in cases of trust. And then they got the Latin phrase. And they said, all right, they got another definition because I forgot what dictionary. I think it was Black's Law 4th edition. They don't have the definition of the word pray, right? So, but what they do have, so what I did was I typed in prater in all the dictionaries that I got to see what popped up. So in the 4th dictionary, they don't have a word prater where they define what it is. But you can find the word prater in other definitions. That makes sense? So they got this word called a tribunal in Black's Law 4th dictionary. And they say this tribunal, and I just read it, a judge is an officer, this is Black's Law 4th. It says an officer so named in his commission who presides in some court, a public officer who is presided to administer the law in a court of justice, the chief member of the court. Um, it was something else that it said. I forgot. Yeah, they said judge and court are sometimes synonymous terms. Okay, well, this word court to them is the word tribunal to them. Okay, what's a court to us? A court at common law is an injured party who needs their rights addressed. Does that make sense? So when we say court, common law, versus when they say court, 2 different. That's how the scammers get away on the internet. That's how you know you're talking to a fan or a bot because they want you to be confused at the definitions of the word. But we always speak in common law language, and they always speak in foreign commercial language. Does that make sense? Alright. So they said this thing called the tribunal is the seat of the judge, okay? So they just said the court and the judge are sometimes synonymous. They cited the Supreme Court of Michigan for that. And they said they give their first definition of this thing called a tribunal. Then they say, all right, now in Roman law, this thing called the tribunal is the elevated seat occupied by the praetor when he judged or heard causes in form. Okay, that's the same guy. You know what I mean? Because why? They said the word judge and the word court mean the same thing when it's over civil issues, when it don't involve an injured party. Because at common law, the Supreme Court of Maryland, not the Supreme Court, the Constitution of Maryland, the Constitution of Indiana, the Constitution of Illinois say that the jury are the judges of the law in the states. The Supreme Court of Vermont said the jury are the judges of the law in the. So if you again, I say this all the time, if you end up in front of a guy on a black robe, it's because of a contract, because that's what a praetor does. And this is just all the definitions that I got today, but I've been trying to figure that stuff out for a while, and they say you go deeper into this word praetor, well, they say he only has jurisdiction over municipal issues, or not municipal, civil issues. They say this thing called the praetor is a civil magistrate. I said, "Oh, shit. Alright, well, that's what it is. That's who that is." He comes from Rome. Yeah, what's the significance of that? Equity. We talk about equity all the time. We don't talk about it. I've been talking about it recently. Let me see if I got my notes. Alright, I guess I'll get on jurisdiction lightly. That's a good segue. Let's see if I got it. In ancient England, remember, I say this all the time. I just put a video on YouTube about it. You cannot understand the Constitution without the common law of England. So if you want to understand how the law is supposed to work, if it goes wrong, why it's going wrong, you got to go back to England. Um, okay, yeah, yeah, bet. All right, so these people called the praetors, right? They didn't always call them praetors. In Rome, in ancient Rome, what people say concerning Rome, I'm the Roman Empire, and this is my Roman. Okay, well, in the high day of what they call the Roman Empire, these people, whenever Rome would take over a territory physically by military force in Rome's heyday, then they would send these people called Roman praetors to take over and administer the civil issues of that region. And I have California's nasty, y'all. California got so much stuff. And so they say, okay, Rome and their army just took over a region, right? Okay, so it's a regime change. Okay, so but according to the law of nations, when you take over another military or another government, you can only take over public property. You can't take over private property, right? So, this is the law of nations, whatever that means. Okay, so they say that they don't do it, but just like what's the name just took. All right, so they set in these guys called praetors to oversee civil issues over this area that they just conquered. All right, and he would be in charge of their books, their law. So you get where I'm going with this. All right, they would take over, and then they would install these guys called praetors, who would be the magistrates over civil issues. They would give them the law of that region. and say, "Okay, you do this, and you administer your judgments based on these books of the law for this region," right? But we'll pay you a little extra to rule in our favor, right? So they got a commission. They got a, they right? So they said they're gonna make everything about you coming in front of them because 'cause they're like a salesman. What's that dude? They're like the Wolf of Wall Street, baby. They said, "Oh, we're finna make it rain in here." They said, uh, "Okay, well, if you pay us every time we subject them we disregard their law, we enforce Roman law, and we get paid every time, they can't get paid unless they get jurisdiction over the case." Okay, well, that's how they freaking make it happen, baby. They don't remember people tell me all the time, "Oh, I went to court, they said they don't do the common law. They said they don't do no constitution. They held me in contempt." Okay, they not trying to hear no common law, baby. They not trying to hear that. They trying to make it rain at Roof Chris, okay? They don't care nothing. They trying to go to Belize for the weekend, right? So they would install these guys after they took over a region, and they would set up shop. They said, "All right, let's make it rain." So in England, it was explicit. People knew. These people came from ancient England. They said this happened it would start in 1066 with William the Conqueror, but over time, eventually in the 1300s, they officially got set up. Well, in the 13th century, so that would be the 1200s. They would have showed up explicitly from Rome. A lot of them when they first showed up in England, but they showed up from Rome to England to start administering the civil laws. And the way they did that is through what they call equity. Ancient England, the first equity case in the 13th century, 1200s, was the judge ignoring the law of England or the law of the kingdom that day and making his own judgment. That's literally what equity that's literally the definition of that in ancient England, when these people from Rome, they call them chancellors, they call them show up from Rome, and they would set up their own they bought old churches and had their tribunals, their religious ceremony, where you would if you I'm gonna get into it, if you were under their jurisdiction, they had control over the case. And then over time, they got their own enforcement officers to hand out citations so that they could keep coming to them, because England didn't pay them for real. England paid them a little I can't explain it like that. They gave them a crappy salary, but they made commission off of these cases. So every time they got jurisdiction of a case, then boom, that's how they did it. Right? So these guys called chancellors, we go over this all the time. What is a chancellor? A chancel is the barrier between the on the other side where this priest would be, on the other side would be somebody who would come up to the barrier or the bar or the bench, and that guy would confess whatever to this guy. They did it because they believed that this guy called a chancellor, which the word chancel means to cancel, could cancel their sins. And so that's where equity this is the story of these people were sent from Rome to ancient England, and they took over civil cases. They didn't have jurisdiction over the law. Why? Because even in ancient England, that's where we get a trial by jury from. The jury was the judges of the law and of the facts in a criminal case. And so You couldn't label something a crime and it went before a guy in a black robe. It had to go to the jury, and it couldn't be created without a grand jury, right? So, but in a civil case, these people explicitly came from Rome. They were called the Cancellaries of Rome, because the people that went to them believed that these people in the black robes had the power to cancel sins in a civil case, right? So, over the years, these guys, and this is all verified, they created this thing called fictions, right? Because nobody was going to them because not everything was a civil action. In ancient England, where we get this thing called a court of record, in a civil case, you couldn't find or imprison, right? So they disregarded that. They said, "Yeah, we're not doing that." So in order to bypass the law, you had to accept a fiction, and that's the only way you could show up in front of a magistrate to begin with, is through the fiction. And so the fiction was an assumption. The fiction was invented by the Roman praetor. Yep, that's the definition of fiction. There you go. I forgot I wrote that there. But the fiction was created by the Roman praetors. Does that make sense? And so you didn't get into equity jurisdiction. Um, William Blackstone said, "You should never be in equity." This dude was a civil magistrate. He said, "The purpose of the magistrate in an English jurisdiction back in the day was to expound or explain the laws that were given to him," right? So they said these Roman praetors, they say you can't even come to us for us to decide an issue unless a fiction that we created had been extended to you. And so he said, well, they say this is a definition. A fiction is an assumption, and this assumption was invented by Roman praetors. Fictions don't have power to decide the law. They do everything under the pretense of doing equity. So they said, when a legislator desires to accomplish something, they use fictions in order to accomplish it, right? So they'll get on the news, they'll get in society and say, "Oh, you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do this. We wrote it in a statute, so that makes it natural law." Well, how does it connect to you? Because remember, we all know if there's no injured party, do what you want at common law. There was no, "You mind your business, I'm not my business." If it don't damage my person or property, I don't care. Right? Okay, good for you or bad for you, I'm sorry, right? We mind our business, right? So they said, "Okay, well, when the legislator wants to try to do something, then they'll write it down on a statute. They can't take it into court over this supposed issue unless the one who needs to be brought into court has attached to the fiction, and that would be equity jurisdiction." And they said they use fictions to accomplish whatever they want. So they get to ignore the law because we accept fictions. We would never see these people if we did not accept fictions, right? So they said, when a legislator desires to accomplish something, they use fictions to do it. And they said this is what they call legislative usurpations of the bench, of the judiciary. And this is explaining in ancient England how they did it. So yeah, that's what they call a judge. They say Judge Judy, Judge Joe Brown. They got TV shows where the lady or the guy is called the judge. Okay, well, right? They are what they actually are Roman praetors. They said in Rome, these guys were the extension of the Roman military. I told y'all the other day we went over equity that these people were called chancellors. When you're in equity jurisdiction, it's not up to you, it's up to the chancellor, okay? The definition of a chancellor was the chief magistrate or dictator, or chief judge or dictator. And they said in 1933, this guy named Adolf Hitler in Germany was appointed to the chancellorship. He was chancellor in Germany. What did I just read? They said when they want to accomplish something, they'll use the legislator to write something, but they use fictions to accomplish it, right? They said these are legislative usurpations of the bench. So once Adolf Hitler became chancellor, he wrote, he made the legislators write that there's no such thing as like on on whatever. And then he was voted president, or I guess maybe they said there's no more term limits on presidency. Then he became president, and he was the president virtually forever. They just be writing fake stuff, and then people in Germany believe it's true, and so that's what they did. He said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, go ahead and hit the erase button on that." They said, "I will be president forever." They literally wrote it. They literally changed the legislative to say, "All right, well, presidents don't have term limits no more." It was never authorized, I'm sure I don't know nothing about this dude called the chancellor. Adolf Hitler was a chancellor in Germany in his day in 1933. So yeah, this is all under the guise of equity. This is all the scammers talking about, "Oh, they gotta give a relief. They always gotta give a remedy." Mhm. You can give them a remedy. It's all about this. It's called the commission. Yeah, they gonna get their remedy. They're getting theirs. I don't know if they're getting yours, right? So, hopefully that made sense. Because I'm gonna clip it and put it on YouTube, so it don't even matter. uh, what was I gonna talk about? I was gonna talk about jurisdiction again. Just give another side to it. Did anybody get that? Did that make sense? Mm, Judges. That's what I was gonna read. This may not be what I'm looking for. Oh, Alabama has it. Alabama has it. Somebody remind me, Alabama. All right. All right. So the Supreme Court of California said every judge, not our judge, but their judge, every judge is bound to know the history and the leading traits which enter into the history of the country where he presides. They say even if that dude was born there, when he accepts that position, it is though he was sent there. He said, "Yes, I'll never understand how America still abides to English laws." Well, I just told you those are not, when they do that, that's not England. England has laws. I just told you where it came from. Where does it come from? I just told you. These are legislative usurpations of the bench. They said this is not English law. Who were the judges in England? The jury were the judges in England. If you didn't accept the fiction, which came from Rome, then you would never even see these people. So this is not, what I'm explaining to you is not English law. Does that make sense? This is not England. English law is common law due process and a trial by jury. So everything that you think is wrong is not coming from England. The Supreme Court of Florida said we're more a common law country than England is anyway. Why? You would have to read the Declaration of Independence to understand that the reason that we glory and talk about the common law of England is because the government was not obeying the common law of England. And so they said, okay, you don't want it, then where's the bar members? Okay, well, get what they're the same people. These all come from another jurisdiction. This none of this is from England. So again, every time you hear the word judge from their side, they're not talking about the jury. They're talking about Roman praetors. This comes from Rome. I asked you before, are we under British rule? And the answer is no. Why would you think we're under British rule? Because we talk about the common law of England. See, this is we got to read the Declaration of Independence. That it's called the Declaration of Independence. Why are we independent? Because the British government was not obeying the law. First of all, there's not a place called Britain. There's an island called England, and the law of England would come from the people. What is the Bar Association? The Bar Association comes from Rome. The Bar Association is not Britain. I just told you, these guys took over the British government. I have this in my book. I read it to myself today, page 88. These are good questions. Don't think I'm mad. I just had a lot of apple juice. All right. They said that these guys called Jesuits were born in the King's Dominion, but they were ordained by the pretended jurisdiction of Rome. There's not one piece of paper that says the Bar Association means the British accreditation registry. That does not exist. You heard that from a conspiracy theorist, a Fed, or a scammer. That is not real. I just told you what the bar was. The bar is the chancel, where they get the word chancellor from, which is equity jurisdiction, which comes from Rome. That's why they call it the bar. That's not what that means. So again, these people called Jesuits. Who are the Jesuits? They come from Rome. It is a religious order that comes from Rome. And they were born in England, just like I'm reading you the Supreme Court of California. They said these judges are bound to know where he presides, as though he was sent there. A barrister is not an ancient English term. That is not the common law of England. Go to my YouTube channel and I go over the timeline of the common law of England. The common law of England is from 510 BC up until 1050 or 1066 AD. Everything after that is Roman invasion. What is the definition of the common law? It is the ancient, it is the usages and customs of the ancient unwritten laws of England. What do attorneys do? They deal with paperwork all day, right? So they said these people called Jesuits, born in the King's Dominion. So they were born in England, but they were ordained under the pretended jurisdiction of Rome and under a pretended act of parliament. This is everything that led up to the Declaration of Independence. They said in the Declaration of Independence that that these people abolished English laws in a neighboring province, setting up an arbitrary government. Okay, well, the United States Continental Congress said that that was the Roman Catholic Church that did that in 1774. I go over the Declaration of Independence on YouTube. Between the year, I forgot the year, but it was like 1710 up until 1760. King George the First and King George the Second, they weren't born in England. They were the king of England by blood, but not by nationality. They were born in Germany. They spoke German. King George the First, King George the Second was born in Germany. They were German. They hardly ever went to England unless it was time to get that bread. And so this is the same time these Jesuit priests, born in England but ordained under the pretended jurisdiction of Rome, took over the legislative branch in England, in Britain. Britain is just the name of the government. England is the name of the land. Just like they say the United States. Well, the United States is just the District of Columbia. You're in one state that is sovereign and independent. I'm trying to get to it, but y'all won't let me. But and so they said this stuff doesn't come from Britain. They said somebody invaded Britain. And because King George the First, King George the Second never went to England, they gave legislative sovereignty over to these guys who were writing fake statutes and fake codes. They took over the writing power. And then they set up these guys called Roman praetors to execute these fake laws. And these fake laws took away and violated the Magna Carta, which took away their life, liberty, or property without due process of law, without the judges of England, who are the jury, deciding the law and the facts. They would start bringing guys into and in front of people in black robes, and then they would just magically pronounce a judgment over them that takes away their life and their property over fake laws, because we accepted fake identifications called fictions. So they said all of this stuff comes from not Britain. They want you to think it's Britain. That's what they want. They don't want you to know it comes from Rome. I wouldn't either if I wanted to take over the world. I would stay in the background. Oh yeah. The British Accreditation Registry. Yeah. You keep going with that. Yeah, let them make YouTube videos. Give a couple scammers a little clout. Yeah, British Accreditation Registry. Ain't nobody can't find one citation. No, don't say we. No, you might be under Roman rule. Don't say we. That was it, guys. That was my Christmas apple juice. I just finished all of it. I have no more. So yeah, don't say we. Again, you're only we if you accept a fiction. So don't say we. We ain't all under Roman rule. That's where I get in trouble, because y'all love speaking French and I don't speak none of it. There's no we. Don't say we all this, we all that. No, speak for yourself. There's some people say, oh, we're just all slaves. No, we ain't all slaves. Speak for yourself. We're all doomed. We all got birth certificates. No, those things aren't admissible in court. So I don't know where we are getting this information from. This is what happens when we don't know the law. Right? This is an ignorance issue. If you believe you have a slave master, okay, well, then you have a slave master. This ain't got nothing to do with we. All right. So the Supreme Court of California said every judge, these Roman praetors, is bound to know the history and the leading traits which enter into the history of the country where he presides. They said, again, remember we read that the word court and the word judge to them means the same thing. So they said that the courts are bound to take notice of matters of public history affecting the whole people. Right? They said in another case that the history of the state, including the most notorious facts, are all matters of judicial cognizance, and the court takes judicial notice of them. So who knows everything? They know stuff we'll never know about. These guys in black robes. Why? These are the guys that were given the law when they accept. See, a regular attorney won't ever know this stuff. Right? They got their secret, I'm sure it's a cult or whatever. They got their secret orders and societies and all that stuff, right? We don't have to talk about it. We just know that's what they do. right? And so they're given the law when they in one of the 50 states or federally, they know the common law of England's the actual law and they get paid to ignore it. They know the fiction is not real. They know they write fake statute. They know it, but they don't care. They get paid every time you give them a plea or you accept a fiction. That's really where they get paid because the fictions were created by them. Every time you go to the DMV, that's not the DMV. That's the fiction creation factory. Who set up the DMV? You think the state of North Carolina set up a DMV? No, a fiction. It's an assumption. This is literally the definition. I literally got this from a dictionary. The definition of the word fiction is an assumption invented by Roman praetors who don't have any power to decide the law. They said this is under the pretense of doing equity. They said this is the definition of the word fiction. I was searching the word equity in different law dictionaries and I ended up on the word fiction. They said, "Oh yeah, yeah, this is how we do equity. It's through fictions." They said, and they also this is what I just read to y'all. They said this is the definition of fiction. When a legislator desires to accomplish something, they use fictions to do it. They said the legislative these are legislative usurpations of the bench. They say the judiciary and the legislator team up, and the legislator says, "Hey, we because they all come from Rome, both of them." Remember, the Jesuits showed up. Uh, they said, "Okay, well, we want to accomplish this. Okay, well, we'll create the fiction. You write the statute that connects to the fiction, and as a result, we will accomplish this goal." That's how fictions work. It's all equity because it's not real. There's no such thing as equity. We literally, for those who weren't here the other day, we literally went over equity and we went through 3 paragraphs and they still hadn't defined the term because they can't. It's all based on what this guy in the black robe does. All right. Alabama. So y'all don't be reminding me. All right. Let's go to Alabama real quick. Then I'll talk about jurisdiction, hopefully. Judge. Let me see. Excuse me. Let me see. I don't think this is what I wanted, but it's good still. I don't think this is what I was looking for, but it says this is the Supreme Court of Alabama. They said that these judges are sworn to determine according to the known laws and customs of the land. They are not delegated to pronounce a new law, but to maintain and expound the old law. What's the old law of Alabama? The common law of England. Do they do that? No, they don't do it. They may do it when they don't have a choice. If you don't have a fiction, they don't have no choice but to do the common law. That's the point that I'm trying. That's the ultimate argument that I'm trying to make. If you can learn to live without fictions, which I'm not saying it's easy, it is incredibly hard. But you get rid of the car, you'll be halfway there. But that's not what I was looking for. I don't remember where I was looking. That ain't it. All right. Let me yap about that, and then if y'all got any more questions, then we will knock those out. Dang, I really want to find it though. All right, let me judges. Let me see if I can search it real quick. I really want to find it. This is all on my Patreon, by the way. $5 a month. Everything I'm reading to you, most of what I'm reading to you, is on the Patreon. Well, no, it would all be on the Patreon because those come from law dictionaries. I got over 20, I think 27 law dictionaries now. So ooh, I forgot about this. This is the Supreme Court of California again. They said the judges, they said the Supreme Court of California said today, no, they didn't. They said back in the day, justices of the peace were rarely lawyers or licensed attorneys. They said they were men who were neither lawyers nor licensed attorneys, and they filled the office of the county judge. They said at common law, I'm telling y'all, these people, there was no such thing as an attorney in the Constitution. There's no such thing as a bar association. All this stuff came after the Civil War. They said it wasn't uncommon for somebody who had not been studied in law to be what we call a judge. Why? Because the issue ultimately went to the jury. It was the responsibility of the presiding justice of the peace just to conduct the ceremony. That was it. That's how it was before the Civil War. And the things we complain about now come from licensed attorneys. So is changing your status with the Secretary of State the main thing that needs to be done? There's no such thing as a status. You don't have a Secretary of State. Well, I just told you that. It's all fake. Can you live without a refrigerator? That's the question. Do you know how to build a log cabin? Because paperwork's not going to get it done. Because when they freeze all the bank accounts and you can't go to a grocery store and you can't put gas in your car and there is no job to go to, there's going to be no such thing as a status. You're going to have to eat. Can you do that? Can you figure out how to build a log cabin instead of learning to try to talk to the Secretary of State about some status that does not exist? Because you don't have such thing as a Secretary of the State. Ooh, I didn't read this, but there's a way to make you recognized as a state. There's no such thing as a state citizen anymore. There's not a way to make them recognize. You're not supposed to be recognizable to them. They're not supposed to know who you are. There's no such thing as a state citizen no more. That's done. Like, I don't want to scare nobody, but we're like in the end times. Like, this is it. You don't get to read. There's no. That's it. We're done. we haven't had a state. They tried it. They did the best they could. We lost. You have to learn to live in the woods because it ain't no recognize. Either you're on their computer or you're not on their computer. The end. Either you know how to take care of yourself when it all fails, or you don't know how to take care of yourself. And then when they send in the international troops because you don't know how to feed yourself, they're not going to care about a status. You were in the line to get fed. Okay. So let me read this again. This is the Supreme Court of California. They said these, what we called a justice of the peace at common law, were never licensed attorneys. They said they were men who were neither lawyers nor licensed attorneys, and they filled the office of a county judge. They said there is no previous custom or usage as suggested by the Supreme Court of Michigan or has by implication become a part of the state constitution. They said none of this stuff is real in the law. Let me see. All right, I can't find it, but that's all right. All right, so the Supreme Court of Washington, um, let me see. Okay, do y'all don't remember this? The other day, I'm trying to see how I can start this. We're getting a little trouble. The other day we talked about the definition of in this state in the state codes. I don't know if any of y'all were on the live then, but they got this thing called in this state or within this state, and it means the exterior boundaries of the actual state. So if a state trooper or a police officer says he has authority in this state, or a piece of paper says they have authority in this state, it doesn't mean the actual state. It means the exterior boundaries of the state. I don't know if anybody was here, but that was the preface to this conversation here. So it says, by reason of his residing within a federal area or receiving income from transactions occurring or services performed in such area. Oh no, people do what they want to do. I can tell them the truth all day. People believe what they want to believe, and they'll face the consequences for believing that. uh, and they said that receiving income from such transactions or recurring from services performed in such area is in any federal area within such state. That's actually pretty good. Okay, here we go. Who is this? This is the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. What's good? Pennsylvania showed up to the fight. They said, and a lot of y'all probably know this case, but they said there is a limited validity of the fiction of a state. Wait, there's that word fiction again. What's that word fiction mean? Oh, here we go. They said this thing called there's a limited validity of the fiction of a state within a state. They said the fiction of a state within a state. See, they be using rap music lyrics. What's a fiction? What's the fiction of a state? State ID, driver's license. They said the fiction of a state within a state can have no validity to prevent the actual state from exercising its power. Then this is the United States Supreme Court that says the fiction of a state within a state can have no validity to prevent the state from exercising its power over the federal area within its boundaries. They said there's a difference between what they call a fiction of the state and the actual state. They said there's a difference between the piece of paper and the actual ground, the piece of land. So people say, And this is the status correction thing. There's no such thing as a status correction in the Constitution because the law that is to be applied is based on where you are domiciled, not based on fictitious identification. So they can call you whatever, and you can call yourself whatever. But the law that is to be applied is based on your domicile, not what they label you. Oh, that's nasty. This is the Supreme Court of Hawaii. Anybody from Hawaii on here? They said that the states have their own courts and the territories have their own courts. They said the state being an independent sovereignty. What do you mean? Hawaii? Why would you say such a thing like that? They said the state being an independent sovereignty within its sphere makes its own constitution and laws. They said and creates its own courts and fixes their jurisdiction. They said while a territory being a political dependency under the absolute control and dominion of Congress. They said a territory's organic law is made by Congress in the federal constitution and its courts, and their jurisdiction and procedure is defined by Congress. So they said the Supreme Court of Hawaii wants us to know, y'all. They said aloha. There's a difference between the states and their courts and the territories of this federal corporation and their courts. They said a state in the 1900s, the Supreme Court of Hawaii said that the state is an independent sovereignty. They said they got their own laws. What's the law of Hawaii? What states are y'all from? Let's play our little game. Oklahoma. What's the law of Oklahoma? Florida. What's the law of Florida? Tennessee. What's the law of Tennessee? What's the law of Texas? What's the law of Maryland? Come on now. Maryland's one of the original 13, right? They said Hawaii's got its own law. The Supreme Court of Hawaii said the states have their own courts, and these things called territories have their own courts. And they said the state is an independent sovereignty within its own sphere. They said Hawaii is its own thing. They said Virginia is its own thing. Wyoming's its own thing. Maryland's its own thing, y'all. Texas, Tennessee. These are my Donald Trump hands. They're their own thing. What do you mean? We don't submit to the absolute control and dominion of Congress. Ugh, that's a nasty statement, y'all. Hawaii said, come on now. Let me grab the mic. The states have their own thing. Right? Let me go to Oklahoma real quick just because. They said, but I thought you guys were the United. Not really. Not like you think. Here we go. This is the Supreme Court of Oklahoma. That goes against the Constitution, doesn't it? No, we got to read the Constitution. See, this is what happens, right? A lot of questions can be answered by you reading the Declaration of Independence, reading the federal Constitution, and reading your state's Constitution. People say, I need to buy some law books. I need to get the law books. What's the law books? Yeah, I got three law books for you. It's called the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, and your state constitution. That'll get you started. Once you read them, then we'll go to the dictionaries. Article 1, Section 9 says, or Section 8 says that Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation. Exclusive means she belongs to me and nobody else. This is what the kids say. They said, this is not the community ball. They said, she belongs to me. They said this thing called legislation, statutes, codes, regulations, ordinances that come from Congress in Article 1. They said it is exclusive over such district. And then they got this thing called a parentheses. A parentheses that says not exceeding the 10-mile square. But I thought no state law supersedes constitutional law. I'm literally reading you co- co- constitutional law. I'm literally reading it to you. And then I just read you the state explaining constitutional law. The exclusive legislation of Congress is only over such district, and it is not to exceed the 10-mile square of such district. They said if it does exceed the 10-mile square, then it is by the consent of the legislator of the state. And if they get the consent of the legislator of the state, then the purpose that that legislation exceeds such district is for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Pertaining to what? They say it. The seat of government called the United States. It's pertaining to federal things. What is the purpose of the Constitution? It is to create three branches of federal government. Why? Why did they set that up? Because the states were bankrupt. They were called and considered independent sovereignties. We just read it, right? Okay, where they had their own currencies. The original 13 had their own currencies. They loaned and borrowed and loaned and borrowed, and they went bankrupt. And they said, all right, we got to clean this up because this article, because they were not obligated to follow the Articles of Confederation. Why? Because they were independent sovereignties. And so they set up this thing called the Federal Corporation where they could deal internationally. And the states did no longer had international power. So they said this thing called commerce is exclusively for this District of Columbia. So they could have international relationships. And they could deal with other nations. But Mississippi can't go to war with Russia or Venezuela. So they send this corporation called the United States to go to war with whoever. They said Vermont can't go to war with Colombia or Russia or China. So they send this corporation called the United States to deal with international things. So whenever you see a military base in your state, that's not in your state. Why? Because that is under the control of the exclusive legislation of Congress. Whenever you go into a post office, you're no longer in Tennessee anymore. That's why they don't have a Tennessee flag above or on top of a post office. Why? Because that's a federal thing. That's dealing with federal things. There's a difference. There's no such thing as a post office in Tennessee. There's no such thing as a Tennessee Social Security Administration. Those are federal things. right? So when we read Hawaii and Hawaii tells us, because the Supreme Court of Hawaii is not stupid, they're not ignorant, they know exactly what they're talking about. Remember, we just talked about these Roman praetors. They were given the law, they know it. They were given a stack of books and said, here you go. Now we will pay you not to do these things, but this is the law, right? They said uh, the states and their courts, and then there's a thing called territories and their courts. They said the state is an independent sovereignty. I got a million cases on that. I don't even have time to go on that. That's a whole day worth of information. They said the state is an independent sovereignty. That's why you have state flags. That's why you have a state Supreme Court. That's why you have a state law. If all the other states failed and were captured and taken over, and it was just your state left, okay, well, we can all go to your state and we would have the common law of England. If your state was the last one standing, okay, we can go to Idaho. We're not going to like it. It's very cold up there, but we could go there and have access to the common law of England, right? Because that is the law of the independent sovereignty called Hawaii, right? So we go to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma says that they got this thing called the common law, which is also called the unwritten law, which is also known at its English birth by the Latin name, the Lex non scripta regni alligae or constitu du alligae, the unwritten law. They said this is a body of non statutory law. What does it mean? Unwritten. You won't find it written down. Why? They said the common law followed in Oklahoma refers to the ancient unwritten laws of England. I told you, what's the unwritten part? What's the ancient unwritten part? From 510 BC to 1066 until William the Conqueror. The last king of the common law would be Edward the Confessor. Go watch YouTube videos about him. That dude was nasty. He was a devout Christian. He abolished all forms of taxes in his day. They said they built a shrine, some type of temple or shrine to Edward the Confessor, and people would go there and get healed. Edward the Confessor. Just look up the last king of the Anglo-Saxons. Edward the Confessor. Confessor, like you're confessing your sins or something. And so they said this common law followed in Oklahoma refers not only to the ancient unwritten laws of England, but the body of law preserved by the decisions of the courts. They said, so they said that's the Supreme Court of Oklahoma. They said the common law of England was brought to this country. What country? The country called Oklahoma. They literally say it. They said the common law of England was brought to this country by our ancestors. These laws have become the laws of Oklahoma. They said on the 22nd day of April, 1889, settled the country known as Oklahoma. Why? So what did Hawaii say? Hawaii said these things called states being an independent sovereignty within its spheres. They made their own constitutions and laws. They said the Constitution wasn't the law. They said they got a law. It's called the common law of England. See, they want you to pay attention to this idea of the Constitution. No, the Constitution just creates a government. It just creates a corporation. That's it. But that's not the law. That's why you read these Supreme Court cases and they'll explain the law to you. They say you can't understand the Constitution without reference to the common law. They say you don't know any phrase or sentence in the Constitution unless you've studied the common law. And then you go to dictionaries and you look up this word common law, and they say it's the ancient unwritten law of the people of England? Oh, well, it's not written down. Well, where do we find it? You'll find it in these Supreme Court cases as we explain these ideas. All right. So they said that was Hawaii. Let me go back to Oklahoma. So I'm gonna read it again. The common law of England was brought into this country by our ancestors. These laws have become the laws of Oklahoma, and on April 22nd, 1889, settled the country known as Oklahoma. They brought into Oklahoma the established principles and rules of the common law as recognized and promulgated by the American courts. They said the decisions of this court, they are founded on the oldest and most sacred principles of the common law. Did I say 1829? No, they said 1889. I guess I don't know anything about Oklahoma. I don't know if that was when they became a state. When did Oklahoma become or join the Union? Join the Union. 1907. Maybe that's when they became a territory. I don't know anything about Oklahoma, so let me see what happened in Oklahoma. In 1889. Oh, the feds opened up 2 million acres of unassigned land. Oh yeah, I did hear like the Indians in I guess they were beefing with the Native Americans in Oklahoma. So a bunch of people moved there. Oh yeah, on April 22nd, there was chaos and utter confusion. They say, yep. Just like they discovered this land. Okay, they say, yep, discovered. They said, get off the boat real quick. All right, discovered. We discovered it. While there were people already there, like, what do you mean you discovered? What is this discovery? That must mean something different than what we mean. They said 50 people, 50,000 people showed up and just started claiming land. Them boys were horrible. Discovered. Then. No, don't ask questions. Don't worry about what happened. We covered it up. All right. What else? All right. What was them? Give me read some other states. Maryland, Tennessee. So you understand your state is its own thing. You should never be paying attention to the feds unless you're actually in federal trouble. Then you might want to pay attention. You might want to study those Bill of Rights there. But every state has its own constitution. Every state has its own law. And for them to exercise their sovereignty would be constitutional law. Because that's what Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says, that they are to guarantee every state in the Union a Republican form of government. What is a Republican government? Again, you're going to have to go back to the common law to understand what that phrase means. Remember, the attorneys and everybody done took over, so they think they get to tell you what it means. That's not what it means. If it don't originate from the people prior to 1776, I wouldn't trust any attorney, any bar member about the subject. Is that legal advice? There's no such thing as legal advice. Maryland. They said when the English colonists crossed the sea to America, they brought with them the common law of England. They said that law was generally recognized in the rule of the colonies of Great Britain. The colonists themselves considered themselves to be 13 separate states. On July 4th, 1776, the 13 states, through 56 representatives of the United States of America, they're quoting the Declaration of Independence. They said 2 days later, the people of Maryland declared their independence from Britain. So you see, they did their own thing. People don't even know this. Delaware was the first state. Delaware was a part of Pennsylvania. Delaware said Pennsylvania was taking too long to declare independence, so they declared independence from Pennsylvania and Great Britain before 1776. They said 2 days later, the people of Maryland declared their independence from Great Britain. On August 14th, 1776, a convention met at Annapolis to establish a form of government for Maryland. They said the delegates labored for 3 months and brought forth a constitution and a declaration of rights. So they had Bill of Rights before there was such thing as a Bill of Rights, right? So when you're dealing with state issues, you don't need to be citing the Fifth Amendment. You need to go to your state constitution and find those rights in those Bill of Rights and argue them. Because they said a territory of the United States has its own courts, and its own laws. So you can't be going to them to deal with state issues. They said the law of Maryland is the common law of England. So you could go straight to your state constitution, Bill of Rights, and jump right to the common law of England. They say you can go right to the Magna Carta. They say you can go right to the sightings of the Anglos and the Saxons. They say you can go right from 1776, you can go right back to 1215. They said in 1770, on August 14, 1776, they met in Annapolis, formed the government of Maryland. The delegates labored for 3 months and brought forth a constitution and a declaration of rights. And then they said paragraph 3 of this Declaration of Rights, adopted in 1776, included the proclamation that the inhabitants of Maryland are entitled to the common law of England. And they said that is in effect today, based on Article 5 of the Maryland Constitution. And then they said it again, 2004. The inhabitants of Maryland are entitled to the common law of England and a trial by jury according to the course of that law. They said it again in the same case. During the period of the 1776 Maryland Constitution was in effect from 1776 to 1850, the legislature did not regulate or enumerate the different types of civil disputes in which the parties may demand a jury trial. So they said even in a civil case in Maryland, you get a trial by jury according to the course of that law. And then they say it at the end of this statement that any civil proceeding, you have a right to a trial by jury. Why would you want to rewrite this? And for what? And replace it with what? What would you replace it with? But why would you? I doubt you could do it. Do you recommend jury over the judge? If you live in one of the 50 states, that's the law. The jury are the judges. The Constitution of Maryland says it. Maryland Constitution. Well, I hope I'm not wrong. Let's see. Declaration of Rights. Jury. The inhabitants of Maryland are entitled to the common law of England and the trial by jury according to the course of that law and to the dang Maryland nasty with it. This is not in other state constitutions. and to the benefit of such English statutes as existed on the fourth day of July, 1776. Let's go. You got a right to a trial by jury in civil proceedings. Dang. Notwithstanding the common law of England, nothing in this constitution prohibits a trial of anything less than 12 jurors. That's nasty, boys. In all criminal prosecutions, you have a right to a speedy trial by an impartial jury. In the trial of all criminal cases, the jury shall be the judges of the law, as well as the facts. There you go. They said this reaches before there was such thing as a United States Constitution, y'all. Y'all get that? You understand how significant that is? And this is considered constitutional. They said it is the right of the federal government to make sure that Maryland has a Republican form of government where the people have the sovereignty. Why? Because they get to, or how? They get to determine the law and the facts. They are the judges of the law. What? This stuff don't exist in other countries, y'all. Not on paper either. I know it don't exist here no more, but it don't exist on paper nowhere else but here. You understand that? This is a significant place. So yeah. So would I prefer the jury over the judge? Well, in Maryland, the jury are the judges. Does that make sense? They said in 2025, the Supreme Court of Maryland said in 1776, the Constitution of Maryland adopted the common law of England as the law of this state. The end. Let me read some other stuff. I'm sorry, I don't want to go. All right, so they said that they created a fiction of a state within a state. So whenever you hear state of, that's not the state. I had a lady in New York try to debate me on this. I was in New York this year just started, but year before last, I spent a winter in New York State. And this lady tried to say that the state of New York was the official name of New York because it was written on a piece of paper. I said, ma'am, that's not how that works. You go to every law dictionary that has ever existed, and you will see New York as the name of the state. You go, I literally showed this to her because I had never been to New York and I had never worked in New York. And so every time we crossed the state line, we worked out of Pennsylvania, but we worked in New York State because I guess they didn't want to pay the taxes or whatever. And so every time we would cross the state line, I would take a picture. If we came in from another part or we left out from another, I would take a picture of the New York state line because I just thought it was cool. One time it just said the Empire State. The other one, it said, welcome to New York. The other one say, welcome to New York. But not one time did it ever say the state of New York. I showed her law dictionaries. Not one time did it say the state of New York. There's no such thing as a state of New York. They created a fiction of a state within a state. So that's not the state. Just because they got it on a police car, don't make that the state. All right. Just like they say, the whole world's blaming the United States for what happened in Venezuela. Okay, well, I wasn't over there. I didn't tell them to do none of that. All that was done without the consent of Congress. Okay, like early last year they bombed Iran. Okay, and then he got on TV the next day and said we bombed. We didn't bomb Iran. I wasn't there. I didn't give nobody permission to do that. I was at work. I didn't bomb anybody. Right? But they got the whole world mad at us, right? Just like people say, oh, it's the Jews. Okay, well, it's not the Jews. It's never the group that they want you to associate with. It is a fiction and you believe the fiction is real, so you attribute everything to the fiction. Actually, I was done reading that. All right, so the Hawaii said that their state, I'm gonna read it one more time because I think it's important. The state and their courts and the territory and their courts. They said the state is an independent sovereignty within its sphere, right? They said the state, being an independent sovereignty, made its own constitution and its own laws. You don't live in the United States, you live in Maryland. That's it. Sorry, that you live in Florida. Wherever you were born is wherever you were born. You can't control it. If you were born in Russia, okay, sorry. You know they call Russia the United States? You know in Mexico they have it's called the United States? Do you know in Brazil it's called the United States? So you don't live in the United States. You live in Virginia. You live in Wisconsin. You live in Minnesota. You live in Texas. You live in Tennessee. The end. Now, if you leave the country physically, then you are represented by this corporation dealing with international things. But when you're on one of the 50 states, you are in an independent sovereign nation with its own state flag, with its own Supreme Court, with its own laws. You go to Louisiana, and they are founded on the Roman civil law. But because they are in a union, they can't go beyond the boundaries of the federal constitution. And as a result, all criminal law is supposed to be governed by the common law of England, where the jury are the judges at common law. So they said a territory is politically dependent under the absolute control and dominion of Congress. So they're explaining, and I didn't, it's not necessary for the case, but the case was talking about before Hawaii became a state, they were a territory of Congress of the United States. Just like Puerto Rico is not a state within the meaning of the Constitution. They are a state. They're not a state to us. They are a state to Congress, to this other entity, right? The Virgin Islands is not a state. They are a territory under the political dependency and absolute control and dominion of Congress. Does that make sense? Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, all of those territories are not states. They are not independent. They are not sovereign. Congress writes statutes explicitly for them. Congress does not write statutes for Wisconsin or Alabama or California. And they say it again. This is the Supreme Court of Hawaii. You can tell I've been on Hawaii today because we don't ever talk about Hawaii. They said it is argued that this is when they were a territory. They're explaining a concept. They said it is argued that the territory of Hawaii is practically a state. They were trying to argue, well, Hawaii at the time was kind of like a state. They said no. The Supreme Court of Hawaii said it is so clear that this territory called Hawaii is not a state within the meaning of the constitutional provision in question, that no further reference is needed to be made to that phase of the argument. They said, get it, we're done here. It is not a state. It is not sovereign. This was before they became a state. And so, which that's another topic. And so, as a result, when Hawaii became a state, Congress had to redact its name from certain federal statutes. So, we talked about this a couple of days ago. I got it in this book where we talk about sovereignty. And they said they had to remove Hawaii's name from federal statutes because why? It no longer applied. They no longer wrote, and those statutes no longer apply to an independent sovereignty called Hawaii, who has their own law and their own courts now, right? So they said, I actually can't read that like I'm supposed to. Let me see if I can zoom in. There we go. They said this is a federal act to amend. They said this is to amend certain laws of the United States in light of the admission of the state of Hawaii into the Union. They said this thing called the United States is amended by striking out the word, continental United States and inserting the words states of the United States and the District of Columbia. Right. So you go to a federal statute, they tell you a state is Puerto Rico, it's the District of Columbia. They say the District of Columbia is a state. Okay, well, we know the District of Columbia is not a state. So they're talking to themselves. Why? Because Congress can do what they want pertaining to themselves. But when they reach outside of such district, that exclusive legislation of Congress only pertains to federal areas like Puerto Rico, Guam, a military base, the post office, right? So they said this thing called the Armed Forces, of which Title 10 of the United States Code is amended by striking out the words Hawaii because they had exclusive responsibility of protecting Hawaii. Now the people of Hawaii have the exclusive responsibility of protecting Hawaii. And now the feds only can go within the international waters level of protecting Hawaii. This stuff is nasty. This stuff is nasty, right? So they said this thing called the Armed Forces of Title 10 of the United States Code is striking out the words Hawaii. And they said there another whatever statutes they're citing is also striking out the main group of Hawaiian islands. They said this thing called the Armed Forces is going to apply, but we're striking out the word Hawaii. Why? Because Hawaii is an independent sovereignty now. They don't have jurisdiction in Hawaii no more. This stuff is nasty, y'all. They said they got this thing called the National Housing Act. They said the National Housing Act is amended by, how do we learn? We don't learn this stuff if they don't, every time they admit a new state, like let's just say, for instance, if Puerto Rico ever becomes a state of the Union, okay, well, they'll have to go back to these previous statutes and strike out wherever they had Puerto Rico. And if they do that, they will admit a lot of stuff that isn't supposed to get out. So I forgot when Hawaii that became a state. It had to have been in like the 50s or something like that, 50s or 60s when Hawaii joined the Union. Okay, well, they had to redo all them statutes. Why? Because Hawaii became sovereign. It graduated to a level of sovereignty where they joined the union of other independent sovereigns. And so Congress no longer speaks on behalf of Hawaii. Oh, this is nasty. See, they hadn't done that for a while. I don't know when Alaska became a state, but states don't join the union that often no more. So they didn't have time to X out, you know what I mean? They had to X out wherever they thought their federal jurisdiction would apply. And then when it didn't apply anymore, they had to strike it out. That's why you won't find any federal legislation telling a state what it can and can't do. So all this lie of, oh, well, federal law trumps state law. Federal law doesn't talk to the states at all. They just told you. They said we no longer talk to Hawaii like that. They said if it's something concerning a conflict of jurisdiction, okay, we'll talk. But Hawaii does its own thing now. But they make movies and television shows and get on the news and act like they're just talking to all of us. Nope. They said that we're no longer talking to Hawaii. We no longer write for Hawaii. They said Hawaii no longer has a ghostwriter. They said Hawaii is its own thing. Do you understand how important that is? So they said we got to strike out a sovereign independent state. That would be like they couldn't put China on there. I don't know if China has states, but they couldn't just put random countries' names on there as though they could tell it what to do. They said we can't tell Hawaii what to do no more unless it's federal property that we own. So the supremacy clause means that states can't go beyond the limits of the federal constitution. Yes, concerning things that federal Congress has exclusive jurisdiction over, like commerce, like equity, like admiralty and maritime jurisdiction. That argument that we made a couple days ago. Okay, well, states don't have in rim admiralty jurisdiction. So they can't tow cars before you've gone before the jury over that issue. Why? Because that's a violation of common law due process. So it means the feds can't go into the states and the states can't do things that only the feds can do. Why? Because the feds have exclusive legislation and regulation over commerce, which can only be heard in a admiralty court. So no state and no state constitution has ever been given in our lifetime or since the federal constitution admiralty powers. That's how you know the states have been taken over by the feds because only the feds can do admiralty and they can't do it in the states. They're not supposed to be doing it in the states. They do it every day. But don't chase alcohol with water. Not a great idea. um Yeah. So what are the limits of the states? They can't do federal things. And this is that we create fake arguments that don't exist. So they say that the states can't violate the bill. They don't violate the Bill of Rights. All of them have the exact same Bill of Rights, and they're more extensive in the states than they are with the feds, right? We read that and we read that all the time. So we create arguments that don't exist, right? Unless it's a federal issue, you shouldn't be citing the federal constitution. Because your state has a constitution. And it would be a violation of the feds, like you see here, to go against the state sovereignty. Now, I know that's easier said than done because the government does break the law every day. So obviously, I'm not naive to say, okay, well, they just do it right no, I know they're breaking the law. I'm just telling you how it's supposed to be on paper. All right, they do this and then still do whatever they I'm sure they tow cars in Hawaii. Right? I'm not naive. I know they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Right? They just went to Venezuela without the consent of Congress, right? So that they said they haven't had a lawful war since World War One. They said that's the last time they had the consent of Congress on a war. So we clearly know both are not obeying the law. So they said 9/11, none of that was with the consent of Congress. They just went to Venezuela without the consent of Congress. They talking about going to Greenland without the consent of Congress. They do what they want to do, right? They'll act like the Supreme Court is restricting them. I seen a thing the other day that said, "Oh, well, Congress is going to pass. They're coming up with a resolution uh, to keep the president from doing things without congressional approval." I said, they already have a thing that keeps the president from doing things without congressional approval. It's called the Constitution. They said, "Oh, we're working on it." They're not working on anything. They don't care. They use our name, and then the whole world hates us, and then they'll label us like they labeled the Jews one day. They'll say, "All these Americans." I didn't tell them to do none of this stuff. All right. Where else was I going with that? So they took out in federal legislation, they had to remove the state of the union called Hawaii from federal legislation. Oh, I didn't read the rest of this. So they said the Securities and Exchange Act, they had to remove the word Hawaii from that. That's where the birth certificates come from. They said the Investment Company Act, they had to remove Hawaii. All these pieces of legislation that had the word Hawaii in there had to remove it. Unless it's legitimate now, like national parks and different things like that. Okay, yeah, the feds have a say so over what happens in national monuments or national parks. Okay, they do control that. Those are federal areas within federal jurisdiction. The feds, when you go to a national or state park, the feds regulate those. They have park rangers and all type of, they got their own thing for that. But that's like 1% of the entire state. That doesn't All right, now this is hilarious. This is when Hawaii joined the union. They joined the union on 1959. All right, so they say this is an act for Hawaii to be granted statehood, which there's no such thing as being granted statehood. Uh, the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled. There was one state where they said there was a difference. There was one that I forgot what state it was. It joined the union. Then they said they did this one thing. The state joined the union under the Act of the United States of America. And then they said that we can't do this thing as the United States. I said, oh, you slipped up on that one. I caught that. So they do things like because the Constitution says that. Well, I got it right here. Let's search it. I don't have to guess. It says new states. Okay, this is Article 4, right? They say new states may be admitted by Congress. This is what we're reading right now, Hawaii joining the union. So they said new states may be admitted by Congress into the union. But they didn't say they created that state. That state existed before there was such thing as it joining the union. Just like the original 13 states existed before there was such thing as a federal government. Just like you read all of your states joining the union, they say that Tennessee started their own constitution and their own state government. They say the people of Mississippi formed for themselves a constitution and state government, whatever they say, and now is hereby admitted into the union on equal footing with the original states in all aspects whatsoever. So, I'll go over some of them. I got some of them. We'll do Texas. I think Texas has got a good one. All right, so they say this is the Constitution, right? So they say when they do this, when they admit a new state that's already been created. So this is a deep. I don't want to. So nobody created Hawaii. The feds didn't create Hawaii. We know that because there are native Hawaiians there, right? And technically, Hawaii is very confusing legally because that people do not associate with the feds at all. And any white or black person that is born in Hawaii, they're legally not called Hawaiians. They said that name is reserved to the native Hawaiian people. They said if you are born in Hawaii, you are called a Hawaiian resident by law. Unlike if you were born in Texas, you are called a Texan. Or if you were born in New York, you're called a New Yorker. They said that it's not etymology, it's called a demonym, is not applied to white and black people born in Hawaii. They say you're called a Hawaiian resident. They say you don't get the term Hawaiian unless you're actually connected to that family or to that bloodline. I guess that is family. So they say Hawaii is very weird legally, but that's not the point of this. Let me read this real quick. All right, so they say, before I started, there's a basketball player. I think it was a college basketball player. He said this. They said he was being interviewed by ESPN or something like that. I don't know the dude's name. Try to Google Hawaiian basketball players. And he gave the interview and said, no. I was born there, but you're not technically Hawaiian unless you're part of that ethnicity or that nationality or that tribe. He said that's a specific group of people. If you're born, he didn't know this, but they got it. Y'all seen that paper where they say you're a Coloradan, you're a Texan, you're a Alabamian, you're a Georgian, you're a Californian. Okay, well, they get to Hawaii and they say Hawaii resident. They're the only ones that got Hawaii resident next to it. They're not called Hawaiians. If you're white or black or Mexican, born in Hawaii and you're not a part of that family, you're not Hawaiian. That's the law because they don't get to determine that nationality. All right. Now they said, all right, Hawaii is hereby declared a state of the United States of America as opposed to the state of the United States and is hereby admitted into the Union on an equal footing with other states in all respects whatsoever. They said the people of Hawaii on November 7th, 1950, excuse me, they're talking about the Hawaii Constitution. They said the people of Hawaii, not the native people of Hawaii, but the people of Hawaii is hereby found to be, their constitution is hereby found to be Republican in its form and in conformity with the Constitution of the United States and the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Now that's a nasty sentence, y'all. They said, could you call an attorney tomorrow? They're going to say, this is the number one thing I debate attorneys on is if the Declaration of Independence law. And it is. And they will look you dead in your face and say it is not. But Hawaii said they crafted their constitution off of the principles in the Declaration of Independence. And an attorney will look you dead in your face. No, it's not binding law. Not binding law. We didn't ask you for your opinion on this. And we got proof. I found this today. I didn't have a great argument. I got a great argument now. So the Declaration of Independence, I told y'all the United States statutes at large is the official legislation of Congress. Whatever the identification of federal law is, it is only the United States statutes at large. Right. Citation, page 1, volume 1 of the United States statutes at large is the Declaration of Independence. I haven't found not case law saying that it's law. I have case law on the Declaration of Independence, but I don't have case law saying that it's law. But it's in federal statutes. It's the very first United States statutes at large. It is federal law. Just like this is Hawaii joining the Union. That is volume 73. Page 4 of the United States statutes at large. Okay. When they said Congress, how do you know it's an official act? Because the Constitution says that new states may be admitted into Congress into this union. All right. And so when Hawaii joins the union, Congress does it. And how does Congress make it an official act that they joined the union? They put it in the United States statutes at large, volume 73, page 4 of the United States statutes at large, right? Okay, well, volume 1, page 1 of this United States statutes at large is the Declaration of Independence. The very first publication of the United States Code has the Declaration of Independence listed as organic law. And then they have the Articles of Confederation and they have the United States Constitution. Then they get to whatever the first United States statutes, whatever that statutes at large. I think they were talking about the post office or something like that. So I forgot where I was going with that. So they say, okay, well, Hawaii built their constitution according to the principles in the Declaration of Independence. Beautiful. I've never heard that before. Look, they said, well, you can't see it, but they said the Constitution of Hawaii shall always be Republican in its form and shall not be repugnant to the Constitution of the United States and the principles of the Declaration of Independence. That's nasty, y'all. That's nasty. That's federal law. uh, I forgot where I was going with that. All right, so yeah, that's Hawaii. So you understand there's a difference between the feds and the states. There was something else I was gonna go to. I'm gonna go to California because they explain it real good. I'm gonna go to California, then I'll go to Georgia. Let's see here. I'm gonna go to I should do a live on the Patriot Act. No, we don't do lives on federal statutes. I'm only addressing a federal statute because it's talking about the independent sovereignty of a state. We don't we the law, the Patriot Act is not the law. It's not the law in Maryland, it's not the law in Oklahoma, it's not the law in whatever state you live in. Yeah, my job's not to go over. That's not the law. That's the whole point of this. Federal statutes are not the law. Maryland has a law. It's called the Common Law of England. Where was I going? California. Let me see. Let me read this, then we'll go to Georgia, the Supreme Court of California. This is fantastic. I forgot I had this. This is fantastic. All right. Let me read a bunch of stuff. The Supreme Court of California. I told you everything I learned came from California. I'm probably never moving there, but everything I've learned comes from California. They said the right to proceed in rem. In rem is an admiralty jurisdiction. That is an admiralty proceeding. That's what they call it. Is distinctly an admiralty remedy. Oh, I should have just kept reading it. So the right to proceed in rem is distinctly an admiralty remedy and exclusively within the control of the United States courts. What's that? That's a federal court. And then they say that no state can confer jurisdiction upon its courts to proceed in rem. I thought I blocked this dude. He keeps popping up. Some of them they'll recreate a new account and then start harassing your chat again. I'm like, oh, I remember that guy. All right. So they said no state can proceed or can confer jurisdiction upon its courts to proceed in rem. Go to your state code. It's not your state code, but go to the state code that's in your state and search the phrase in rem. That mug gonna light up like a Christmas tree, boy. All they do is in rem now. And the Supreme Court of California said California and no state can do in rem in courts in this state. What does in rem mean? In rem is what they call for prize courts. Whenever they want to make a claim, in rem means a thing in Latin. So whenever it's attached, whenever they can attach to it and bring it in court or bring you into court, they'll attach to that thing called a bank account or a car, and they can seize or levy that thing before they've rendered a judgment on that thing. That's what they fought the Revolutionary War over, because they were taking people's property and putting them in jail without being brought before the jury, who are the lawful judges. You see, they got statutes that say, oh, if you arrest them, you got to take them before a magistrate. No, you're supposed to be not arresting them. And if you can't arrest them until after they've been to the jury. But that's another topic for another day. But this is another one. This is what I want to talk about. They said in determining the bound, this is the Supreme Court of California. Because if I don't say that, they'll say I'm spreading misinformation or some foolishness. So they said in determining the boundaries of apparently conflicting powers between the states and the general government, The proper question is not so much what has been in termed reserved to the states as what has been expressly or by necessary implication granted by the people to the national government. To the national government. I typed it wrong. They said for each state possesses all the powers of an independent sovereign nation. Let me read it again. For each state possesses all the how many powers? All of them. They said each state possesses all the powers of an independent and sovereign nation. I got books on this Patreon. Y'all better join the Patreon. This stuff is nasty. That they said Illinois is as sovereign as Russia. They said, what was it? New Hampshire is as sovereign as Guatemala. What was the other one? It was New York. New York is as sovereign as Japan. I'm like, what do you mean they're as sovereign as Japan? Like if you've never been to New York, okay, well, if you go to New York, you got to consider that like going to Japan. You know how crazy that sounds? They ain't teach us that. If you go to Mississippi, you got to treat that as going to Brazil. You just stepped into an independent sovereign nation called Mississippi. California said, when you get to California, you better start respecting the game out here. All right. They said we got our own flag, our own Supreme Court. How does California get to say this stuff? California was never a federal territory. Texas was never a federal territory. The original 13 states existed before there was such thing as a federal government for 13 years. They say you go to Georgia, you fly into Atlanta on Delta Airlines, you got to treat that as going to an independent and sovereign nation. They said that's just like going to Jamaica or just like going to the Bahamas. They say every time you go into Maryland, you're going into an independent and sovereign nation, y'all. They don't teach us that. They don't want us to know that. Like, we really don't get it. Like, for those, and this is not a shame. If you've never traveled, if you've never traveled to the different states, like, it's crazy. Every state is different, y'all. It's its own thing. You go to Wyoming, Wyoming is, no lie, probably the most beautiful place I've ever been to. They say if you go to Colorado, Utah, or Wyoming, it's just like going to the Swiss Alps over there in Switzerland. They say it's exactly the same. They said they got spots in Colorado that look just like the Swiss Alps in I don't know if the Swiss Alps are in Switzerland, but that whatever's over there, they say it looked just like that. They say they be making movies in all these other countries. They say you could save money just by making it in Colorado. They say you go to Arizona, it's places that look otherworldly there. You go to Arizona, you got places in New Mexico. Every state is its own thing, y'all. You got to see it like it's its own country. I got this thing from Delaware. Delaware said, well, they didn't call themselves Americans when the country started. They called themselves Virginians and South Carolinians and Delawareans and whatever other states were. Where's Delaware? Yeah, they said they had not conceived of the thought that they were Americans. They said there was no such, man, there's some nasty stuff in this, man. They said there was no such thing as Americans. Not like that. They said they were New Englanders. They were Marylanders. They were Delawareans, Pennsylvanians, Virginians, Carolinians. They said they were sectional prejudices. They said it was okay. They used to beef all the time. Right? They said, you know how New York and California always be talking trash about each other? Okay, they said this is nothing new. You know how we always think Texas has the loudest mouths because they think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Okay, they said that was okay. We used to talk trash about each other because we were there. Everybody was their own thing. They said they were their own nations. They considered themselves. I read it earlier. Who was it? They said they considered it was Maryland. They said they considered the 13 states independent, y'all. Your state is its own thing. It has its own law. That's why I ask y'all all the time, what's the law of your state? Do I ever let people up? Probably. No, not mostly. Not ever. The last time no, I don't. Nope, I don't. Hey, when you tell the truth, you don't get to be popular. You just got to tell the truth. And the Bible says, whoever has an ear to hear, you know what I mean? I'm not special. I don't think I know more than anybody else. I just tell you what they said. I don't have an opinion on this stuff. They said they called themselves this, right? This isn't my knowledge. This isn't my info. I just read it. I wonder that too. I'm like, dang, I got a nice camera. Let me show you the camera. I got this ain't my best lens, but this camera is like the lens and the body and the microphone. It's like 5 grand. Makes beautiful images. I'll be making videos with it. They don't show it, bro. They don't care. They said, no, we don't tell the truth here, buddy. If you don't make a dance on TikTok, we're not showing it. They said, we don't do that telling the truth thing. Now, when I started, well, I guess that's because I had just started. Boy, I was getting crazy, crazy views because people hadn't heard that type of stuff on the internet before. But yeah, I forgot what I was talking about. California. That's actually not what I was looking for. Here we go. The Supreme Court of California said that Californians are entitled to greater protection under the California Constitution, excuse me, against unreasonable search and seizures than required by the US Constitution. They said the nation is composed of distinct geographical and political entities independently responsible for safeguarding the rights of their citizens. What? I thought we were United States. No, that ain't what they said. They said California declared that the rights guaranteed by the California Constitution are not dependent on those guaranteed by the United States Constitution. Oh, this is nasty. They said California, we now I'm not saying California do this. We know California don't do this. I'm just telling you what they said on paper. I'm telling you what they're supposed to be doing. I'm not naive. I know they don't obey the law, right? They said on paper, when history looks back, oh, they were independent sovereign. Yeah, they don't do that. Right? They said they're supposed to be protecting the rights of Californians. And if you come from another state into California, then you're supposed to be protected. That's what the Constitution say. The citizens of one state. Well, actually, that's the Articles of Confederation, but they confirm that too. They say you're entitled to ingress and regress from different states. You're entitled to. That's what equity means in the Constitution. It's dang it, where's it at? Yeah, the privileges and immunities in one state you'll be entitled to when you're in that state. So if I go to Maryland and Maryland get to do things that maybe my state don't get to do, then I get access to that, and that would be a privilege of me being in that independent and sovereign nation. So rights are different than privileges. Privileges would be based on what they're not when I say allowed, I don't mean like they gave them permission to do it. I'm saying these are the things they enjoy. Like if they got a mountain that we don't have that I don't get to climb, okay, well, they got the privilege to do that. And if I get to go to their state, then I get the privilege to do that too. Privilege doesn't mean um they let me do it. It privilege means honor. Does that make sense? This is a royal charter. The people of the states are sovereign. You have to see that. I mean, we don't. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. Maybe I'll talk about that tomorrow. But you have to see that this is a royal decree from the people of the 13 states. So when the other states join this union that was created by 13 states, you get that royal access. You get to operate as a royalty as long as you're not in commercial contracts. um, that's not what I was talking about. Let me read it again. Californians are entitled to greater protection under the California Constitution under or against unreasonable search and seizures than that required by the US Constitution. The nation is composed of distinct geographical entities and political entities independently responsible for safeguarding the rights of their citizens. They said California declared that rights guaranteed by this Constitution are not dependent on those guaranteed by the United States Constitution. Why? Because they're talking to their people and we're talking to our people. The states do not grant or deny rights. They do grant rights. They have the right to give you access to commerce because commerce is a foreign law. You didn't create commerce, and commerce is not an American concept. So when you get and engage into commerce, they give you that privilege and they regulate it. A state ID and purchasing a car. Those are your examples of commercial contracts. People say they don't grant and deny rights, but yet there's people in prisons today because they chose to participate in commerce. That is a right. You didn't create commerce, they created commerce. They get to give you the right of what they created. Remember, these are not our governments anymore since the Civil War. All they do is commerce. You would be treated like royalty and they would serve you if you were not in commercial contracts. Um the Supreme Court of Delaware said Delaware remains a sovereign state. Delaware was the first state. No, that's not what privilege is. Privilege means honor, access to something that is specific to the distinct geographical location. And you get access to that as a privilege, as an honor, because you don't have that in your state. Delaware remains a sovereign state governed by its own laws and shaped by its own unique heritage. Delaware's people enjoy more rights and more constitutional protections than the federal constitution extends to them. Well, you don't vote for them. You've never voted for anything. That's not an attribute of sovereignty either. So you don't vote. They say that in the federal constitution. You've never voted for anything. You don't vote for president. They have an electoral college. And whether you voted for them or not is not related to a right because they are supposed to be bound by the words in the Constitution. No, you are not talking about that. All right. So, Supreme Court of Delaware. See, that's how you know they start creeping in when you're telling the truth. They don't like that. No, don't tell them they're sovereign and they can do whatever they want. Nobody should have a problem with this information that I'm telling you. Only people who want to restrict this stuff want to be the ones that try to dictate how you think about it. California said they are independently responsible for their people. Who created the California government? The people of California. So they're the ones that are supposed to be in charge of it. On paper, they are in charge of it. States can't do what? Who is the state? I was just there. I lost my place. Yeah, they said Delaware people enjoy more than the federal constitution extends to them. So the Delaware, since I'm on Delaware's right now, I'll go to Georgia next. The Supreme Court of Delaware said that the legislator is supposed to represent the sovereignty of the people. It cannot pass any law that is inconsistent with the Constitution of this state. They said the original and ultimate sovereignty is in the people. They said in 1991 that pursuant to the Articles of Confederation, ooh, that's nasty, each state's own sovereignty was made paramount to the national sovereignty. Paramount. But I thought the Constitution was the supreme law of the land. Right. The sovereign power inheres directly in the people. That was in 2014. Who told you they can't grant or deny you rights? The people created what they were allowed to do. The federal constitution says they regulate commerce. You did not create commerce. You participate in somebody else's private law by participating in commerce. Commerce is not an American term, it's not an English term. It comes from the Canaanites in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So if you participate in commerce, you can waive your rights as a sovereign individual. They said we wouldn't have no power if you didn't participate. They say it every day. They said we created these fictions. And if you participate in fictions because of your ignorance, then that's not our fault. They said fiction comes from commerce. That comes from fake pieces of paper. Them fake pieces of paper come from somewhere else. That's not an English concept. That's not the common law of England. They said you have sovereignty through the grand jury, through the trial by jury, through the injured party being able to bring somebody that they accused before the jury. And with the proper evidence and the law and the facts, that is an exercise of sovereignty. Outside of that, you should never see us because most of what we're doing is not even talking to you. No, it don't make it void. And you can't prove that it was under duress. Nobody made you do that. Nobody made you go to the DMV. You can't find one law or requirement for you to have to go to the DMV and ask for a state ID. Nobody made you get a state ID or a driver's license. Nobody. You were not held in chains. You were not subdued. You were not under duress. You did exactly what they were told, what you were told to do. And if you didn't know the law, if you didn't read the Constitution, if your parents didn't teach you the law and the facts, then that is not their fault that you voluntarily asked for a state ID. It's not false information. They have the right and the power to regulate commerce. Every truck driver is lawfully required by the Constitution to have a driver's license, to be and operate a registered vehicle. That is the law, because they are paid to take something from point A to point B, and they have to show that while they were paid to do it, that they have the paperwork to execute a commercial contract. So if you believe they were talking to you in ignorance, that's not their fault, because that is a lawful constitutional concept. Because every Uber driver, every taxi driver, every truck driver, everybody who gets paid to drive to take something from point A to point B is required to have a driver's license, is required to go to the DMV, is required to have all the registration, the insurance, all of the things that they claim they are supposed to have. They are required to have it by the Constitution. That's the law. And nobody told you to go there. Nobody. Because you didn't read the law. And you can't say, oh, misinformation and fraud. No, because the people who were supposed to be there, that's who that building is for. They're supposed to pay and be taxed, not taxed on their earnings, but taxed to pay for that license. That is a privilege. That is a right that the government gives to the driver for him to be able to participate in commerce. Nope, nobody's forced. Nobody told you to get a driver's license. Nobody. You can't prove it. So you're making up superlatives that don't exist. You went to the DMV voluntarily. They don't even have people from the police office there. Well, how they gonna take you to jail? See, that's what happens when you don't know the law. They can't process you in the jail if you don't have one of their identifications. If a truck driver doesn't have a license and doesn't have his car registered and insured, or the truck registered and insured, and he crashes into a bunch of people, he goes to prison. Why? Because he created an injured party. He gets all the fines, he gets all the violations that are lawfully due him, because they can grant and deny the right to commerce, because he didn't create commerce. Commerce was created way before there was such thing as a United States of America or a such thing as a Virginia. So you don't let these feds get in your head and create fake illusions on, oh, well, they can't do this and they can't do that. No, they can, for the right lawful purpose. And if you're participating in things in ignorance, that's not their fault. They say you shouldn't even, you talking about the common law. This is not an issue of common law here. We got this thing called the state ID that showed up on the cop's computer. If you didn't show up on the cop's computer, or your car didn't show up on the cop's computer, you wouldn't even be here. Talking about you, we're taking away your right. We're not here about the common law, sweetie. We are commercial courts. They've always been that way. They said commerce is always voluntary, and they're always heard in admiralty courts. So again, we went to the DMV. We never read a constitution. Most people talking about this stuff don't read the Constitution now. All they talk about is equity, and they don't have no clue what equity is. Talking about commercial instruments, when it goes to the fiduciary, they don't have no clue what they're talking about. They believe what somebody else told them, and they can't prove anything that they're saying. Somebody said something about NREM. So NREM is the same thing as admiralty law, and the states are supposed to. NREM is admiralty law. NREM is, in Latin, a thing. That is how admiralty jurisdiction works. So they got two types of jurisdiction. They have in personam and they have in rem. In personam, because I don't have time to explain it, is a state ID, right? That's a state ID, a driver's license. That's how you have to voluntarily sign up for those things in order for the corporation to attach to you. Just like everything in the federal constitution or federal law applies to government employees who took an oath to the Constitution. because they're dealing with commercial things. They're not even supposed to know we exist unless we create an injured party or somebody created an injured party on us or our property. Right? So in RIM, they don't ever say admiralty, right? They people who talk about admiralty in court get looked at like they're crazy, but you go to your codes and all you see is in RIM. Well, at RIM is exclusively admiralty. I got that in this book. Oops. They say in RIM, they say admiralty only acts in RIM. And no one can be bound by admiralty unless they consent. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Admiralty acts only in RIM, and no person can be subject to that jurisdiction but by his consent on a contract. They said a court of admiralty has jurisdiction over the person. That's called in personam. There was another one. They said admiralty has jurisdiction over cars and people on the road. I don't know if I can find that one as fast. Beautiful, beautiful. Admiralty courts. Oh, no. They said this power called admiralty is extensive upon land as upon water. They said the Constitution makes no distinction in that respect. They said if admiralty jurisdiction in matters of contract, which the courts of the United States may lawfully exercise on contracts on land, it may also embrace vehicles and persons. Excuse me, it said it would be in the power of Congress to confer admiralty jurisdiction over its courts over cars engaged in transporting passengers or merchandise. And that action denies the parties a trial by jury. You understand that? So every time you get on an airplane, that's not an evil thing. It's evil when it's misapplied. But if you're on an airplane, the pilot is the captain of the ship. You understand that? If you get on the Greyhound bus driver is the captain of the ship. According to Admiralty law, whatever that bus driver says goes. If you get hypothetically in an Uber, right? It sounds crazy, it sounds silly, but that's the truth. You go to the definitions of admiralty, they say those courts are only, they got actual ships and things that are on the water, but those are the type of courts for commerce as well. Those are the only type of courts for commerce. I got a video on YouTube about it, about commerce in the Constitution. Right? Now, what happens is our ignorance. When we sign up for commercial contracts, well, there's only one type of court that can hear it. In admiralty, when your car shows up on their computer, there's only one type of court that can hear it. So yes, I'm not naive. I know they're not supposed to be doing these things, but they would not have the power if we did not give it to them. And when you get up in there, they don't want to hear nothing about no common law of England or the United States Constitution, right? How do they get to abuse us? Because we sign up in ignorance. All right. The book is called The Discernment of the Vigil. You won't find it on Google unless somebody's resold it, but constitutionacademy.org. Somebody type it in the comments. Constitutionacademy.org. I think it's 25, it's almost 300 pages. 275, 277, 278. Technically, it's more than that. That's just when I start. I got other stuff in here. So it's almost 300. It's like 280 something, but that's not important. But constitutionacademy.org. Does that make sense? So, yes, I know it's wrong for them to do it. They say it. I just read it to you. The Supreme Court of California said the right to proceed in rem is distinctly an admiralty remedy and exclusively within the control of the United States courts. What's that? Federal courts, the district courts primarily. They said no state. How many states? No states can confer jurisdiction upon its courts to proceed in rem. What is in rem? In rem is when they tow your car before you've went to court over the issue. That's a violation of common law due process. And in California, not like it's nowhere else, but we're talking about California. The law of California is the common law of England. And that common law, you have common law due process, which says you have to give notice, hearing, and then you have to give it to the jury before you can prescribe a punishment. Does that make sense? Um, what about Oregon? Of course. Let's go to Oregon. Someone's like, but you missed my state. What is the law of Oregon? Ooh, I forgot about Oregon. Oregon got some nasty stuff. Your state Supreme Court's got some nasty stuff. Look at this. You can't see it, but the guarantee of remedy by due course of law, that's what they would have called due process in ancient England. They said a guarantee that dates back way of the original they said way before 1776. They said this go back to a guy named King John. I got this TikTok. I made a TikTok on this yesterday. King John's promise in the Magna Carta, chapter 40. To no one we will sell, no one we will deny or delay a right or justice. They said the thing we got in our state constitutions come from the Magna Carta. That's nasty. They said in 2016, y'all, they said Oregon's remedy clause stems from Lord Edward Cook's interpretation of the 29th chapter of the Magna Carta. They said, this is another part of the case. They said the due process clause in Oregon's constitution says that it comes from chapter 29 of the Magna Carta, which says that no man, no free man shall be taken or imprisoned or diseased of his freehold. I think I'm saying that wrong. I think it's deceased of his freehold, but by the lawful judgment of his peers. Who are the lawful judgment of his peers? The jury. Who are the lawful judges of Oregon? The jury, not the guy in the black robe. This is my website. This is Patreon. This is Constitution Academy on Patreon. Everything, most of what I've read you tonight is from Patreon. This is where I post all of my findings and my research. It's $5 a month. I got so many law books on there. It's ridiculous now. I got over 1,000 pieces of information on here. $5 a month. And I cite where I get everything from. If it came from a law book, I either got the law book uploaded, or if it's from a case, I'll tell you what case it come from. Sometimes the case will cite a book. I'll go get the book and then put the book on there. Then I'll buy the law book, have it digitized, and then I'll scan it up on there. If they got books about your state, I try to find them, and then I'll make a little thing called the Oregon Library, if I find a book. But that actually wasn't what I was reading. So what is the law of Oregon? The Supreme Court of Oregon said the common law of England was a part of Oregon's territorial law, which continues as of 1992. They said with the first laws adopted in the Oregon Territory in 1843, they borrowed from the Iowa Territory, where it says that the principles of the common law shall govern. Then they said in another case, what case is that? Oh, okay, okay. I see what I did. I said it says the common law of England was adopted prior to statehood as Oregon's provisional government by Oregon's provisional government, and they said that the common law of England is the law of the land. Oh, Texas. Yeah, I did say that I was going to Texas. Sorry. So, what's the law of Oregon? I found this the other day in Texas, not in Texas, but about Texas. They said this thing. Let me see. I got screenshots, so it's difficult to read. And these books are old. They said this thing called the habeas corpus. This is the first introduction of any part of the common law into Texas. They said that the habeas corpus was not given by the common law, but by the statute. See, this is what I learned. See, you start, it's all in these old law books. They tell you the history and they keep this stuff from us, right? So now I kind of knew this. I knew that all of the writs, so what they call common law writs, they got a habeas corpus. That's the main common law writ. That's where you challenge the process, where the corporation has to challenge the process if you've been falsely imprisoned, and they will review the process. And if you can address the violations of due process, they will let you out of prison. And I've only known of one person. I didn't know him, but I've heard of one guy doing it. I'm sure it happens every day, but hypothetically. All right. So they tell you the history of habeas corpus. I hadn't found this nowhere else. They said the habeas corpus was not given by the common law. What's the common law? It's prior to William the Conqueror, right? So after William the Conqueror, they got this thing called the Magna Carta, where they put those ancient principles into a commercial document, right? So they say this habeas corpus was not in the common law, but it was given by statute in ancient England by a guy named Charles II. And they said the common law of England must have had reference as well to the crimes which were such according to the general customs of the country, as to the statutory crimes as far as applicable. They said the writ of habeas corpus is believed to have been unknown to the Spanish regimen. So they're talking. So if you know Texas, if you're from Texas, okay, well they're becoming a state, they're removing Mexican and Spanish laws as they're incorporating the common law of England into the Texas Constitution. I can't believe I know this stuff, y'all. This is crazy. You got to lose all your friends. That's all I know. That's how you learn it. They said this is the Texas Constitution. They said all trials shall be by jury. How many? All trials shall be by jury. That's the Texas Constitution, y'all. They said, and in criminal cases, the proceeding shall be regulated and conducted upon the principles of the common law of England. And then they got, I don't know what this is. Maybe somebody from Texas can tell me. What's a cahula? A cohulia. It's probably Spanish or Mexican, but I don't know what that means. I don't know nothing about Texas, but they said all causes, civil and criminal, shall be tried by juries in the manner and form prescribed by this law. And then the Texas Supreme Court cited that. And then they say when they adopted the common law, they said this is an act to adopt the common law of England and to repeal Mexican laws. All right. Colorado or Arizona? The answer's the same. What did we read so far? What is the law of Oklahoma? What is the law of Texas? What is the law of Oregon? The answer's the same. Actually, I found this the other day, but let me read it again. They said in 1861, the territory of Colorado adopted the common law of England. And they said all of the common law prior to the fourth year of James the Fourth. Hold on, let me read it right. I'm playing. On July 4th, 1876, the Constitution of Colorado was adopted. And they said the common law had been enforced in this jurisdiction for 15 years prior to them becoming a state. They said, what are you talking about? They said, we got the same common law the original 13 states took as an inheritance. Ooh, that's a nasty term. They said, and so held it at the adoption of their constitutions. They said, we did the same thing. They said this court is then a constitutional court with common law powers, and that the common law is in force. They said there has been no change in the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court since the adoption of the Constitution. They said the common law, baby, that's it. And now, actually, I have another book that I just found this last week, I think. They said this is the act when they were a territory. They said the common law of England prior to the fourth year of James the First, and they got all this British stuff in there, shall be in full force. All trials for criminal offenses in Colorado should be according to the course of common law. Now, somebody's going to come in the comments and say, oh, that means we never broke off from England. No, you have no clue what that means. Arizona. So what's the law? What's the law? What's the law? What's the law? Arizona. They said we adopted the common law of England. It just gets funny. You know what I mean? Like, they don't tell us this stuff. We would never know. If some nerd doesn't figure it out, we'd never know this stuff. They don't talk about it, so they don't like it. You know they don't like it. So it's got to be the true law. Right? They said the common law of England shall be the rule of decision in all courts in Arizona. There you go. They don't do it, do they? No, they don't. That's how you know it's the law they're supposed to be doing. What does that mean? That means the jury are the judges, not the guy in the black robe. He's not supposed to be deciding anything related to people's life or property. They said the common law of Arizona is the English common law, down to the time of the severing of the union between the colonies and the mother country. They said the common law is the rule of decision in all courts of this state. They didn't say that in 1836, y'all. They said that in 2004. In 2020, they cite the Arizona Constitution and says that Article 2, Section 23 of the Arizona Constitution says that the right to a trial by jury shall remain inviolate. Utah, I like Utah. If I can handle the winter, I'd probably go to Utah. No, if I could handle the winter, I would go to Indiana. I don't know nothing about Indiana, so it might be trash, but Indiana's got the best outside of California. I think Indiana's got the best law on paper. On paper. Utah. In 1898, the common law of England was expressly adopted as the law. See, they don't, some states will tell you, some will sugarcoat around the issue. Utah says, what's the law of Utah? The common law of England, baby. They said we adopted it as the law.